The pedicle awl is utilized to break through the cortex of the pedicle during preparation. The awl has a stop to allow for a maximum insertion depth of 20 millimeters, and the distal portion of the instrument shaft is triangulated to accommodate visualization of the tip. The proximal portion of the awl has an impactor cap to accommodate technique. The gearshift probe is utilized to prepare a pilot hole prior to screw insertion. The gearshift probe has a curved spatula tip to accommodate technique, depth markings to aid in screw length selection, and an impaction surface. Pedicle markers are supplied to confirm trajectory. For clear differentiation, markers are supplied in both left and right configurations. Pedicle markers are loaded into and released from the torque screwdriver by pulling back on the outer shaft of the driver. Releasing the outer shaft of the driver locks the marker into the instrument for insertion. The cutting surfaces of the system's taps are post-processed to minimize friction and heat generation during insertion and to maximize the life of the cutting surfaces. To accommodate technique, the outside diameter of each tap is 1/2 millimeters smaller than its corresponding screw's outside diameter. Depth markings on both the distal and proximal portions of the instrument shaft allow for easy visualization of the depth. A soft tissue sleeve is offered to cover the cutting surfaces of the instrument during initial insertion. Taps are offered for each screw diameter from 4.5 millimeters through 8.5 millimeters. Taps are loaded into and released from the ratcheting T-handle by pulling back on the Hudson fitting of the T-handle. A flexible sound is supplied to allow one to tactily probe the pedicle after preparation. The ratcheting T-handle is utilized with both the taps and the screwdrivers. It features a Hudson fitting for connection, and direction is controlled via the knob just below the handle. To accommodate individual technique, the system offers 3 different screwdrivers. The distal tip of the standard screwdriver is first loaded into the head of the screw, after which the mating surface of the driver is rotated into the screw head to lock the screw to the driver. Locking is confirmed via the window in the instrument shaft. Rotation of the mating surface into and out of the screw head is accomplished via the silver knobs located nearest the screwdriver handle. The screwdriver is loaded into and released from the ratcheting T-handle by pulling back on the Hudson fitting of the T-handle. The quick driver minimizes steps during loading and unloading of the screw and is offered as an alternative to the standard driver. The distal tip of the quick driver is first loaded into the head of the screw, after which the collet is pressed into the head of the screw to lock the screw to the driver. The instrument is released from the screw by upright pressure or by manual release of the collet from the screw head. The quick driver is loaded into and released from the ratcheting T-handle by pulling back on the Hudson fitting of the T-handle. The locking screwdriver rigidly attaches the driver to the screw to accommodate techniques which direct the screw through side loading of the instrument. The distal tip of the standard screwdriver is first loaded into the head of the screw, after which the mating surface of the driver is rotated into the screw head to initially lock the screw to the driver. Rigid locking is achieved by rotating the top blue knob of the driver. The malleable rod template can be utilized to verify both the length and the contour of the rod prior to rod insertion. The rod bender can be utilized to contour the rod to a small, medium, or large radius. The center cam is positioned to the desired radius prior to contouring. The rod holder can be utilized to introduce the rod into the wound, to manipulate the rod, or to accommodate additional compression or distraction. The rod rocker is utilized for minor translation of the rod during cap insertion. The rod persuader is utilized for translation of the rod requiring greater than 2 millimeters of reduction. The L-wrench is utilized for rod manipulation by inserting the distal hex of the instrument into the recessed hex of the rod. The cap inserter is utilized during initial locking. Reference marks at the distal end of the instrument aid in alignment during both cap loading from the tray and cap insertion into the screw head. A visual indicator at the middle of the instrument confirms when the cap is properly loaded. The torque screwdriver is utilized for insertion of the pedicle markers, provisional tightening of the set screw of the locking caps, and in conjunction with the torque limiter, final locking of the construct. Replaceable tips ensure the integrity of the final locking instrumentation in each case. Replaceable tips are loaded into and released from the torque screwdriver by pulling back on the outer shaft of the driver. Releasing the outer shaft of the driver locks the tip into the instrument for insertion. The torque limiter ensures that the correct final locking torque of 65 inch-pounds is achieved during final locking. Prior to final locking, the extended hex end of the torque limiter is inserted into the recessed end of the torque screwdriver to assemble the two instruments into a single unit. The counter-torque instrument is utilized to stabilize the construct during final locking. The cross-connector cam wrench is utilized to lock the cams of the cross-connector. The cross-connector hex wrench is utilized to lock the hex nut of the cross-connector. The cross-connector torque limiter ensures that the correct final locking torque of 30 inch-pounds is achieved during final locking of the cams and center nut of the cross-connector. The cross-connector cam wrench and hex wrench are loaded into and released from the torque limiter by pulling back on the Hudson fitting of the torque limiter. The distractor is utilized to distract between segments. The compressor is utilized to compress segments.